Friends, yesterday we left off with an open question. Senator Lindsey Graham died a day after returning from Kyiv, and his office released a terse statement. A brief and sudden illness while the family asked for privacy. I said then that it doesn't happen like that. We weren't told a word about the death of a very public figure who had lived in the spotlight for decades. And now, in the past day, we've been told. Today we're going to discuss three things: what he actually died from, who will take his seat, and most importantly for us, what will happen now to that blow against Russia that he was preparing in the last days of his life. Let's start with the cause. On July 12th, the Office of Forensic Medicine of the District of Columbia, that same Washington where he died, released a preliminary report. That means, besides the preliminary one, there will be another one later. The wording is as follows: aortic dissection due to atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. In plain language, so we can understand it, it means this: the body's main artery, the aorta, tears from the inside due to years of hardening of the blood vessels. This is a sudden, catastrophic event that happens very quickly. A person can be gone in a minute. And unfortunately, at 71 years old, this is far from uncommon. According to preliminary data, there are no signs of violence and no foul play. What's unclear here is, basically, senators, well, the president even more so, but still, senators undergo pretty intensive medical examinations, and something happens to them, they don't feel quite right, mentally at all. Their staff, the staff of their offices, sends them, so to speak, they call doctors and send them for examinations. I don't know what will turn out. Maybe he didn't go to them, maybe he didn't like them, maybe something else, but it's very strange. And here I have to say two things. The first official version has been stated, and I have no right to hide it from you or pretend it doesn't exist. If in the previous broadcast the word poisoning was kind of left hanging in the air, today I have to say that the doctors are mentioning the aorta, not poison. Anyone who wants to be honest must accept the new fact, not cling to yesterday's guess. Second, and to be honest, somewhere deep inside, each of us has this quiet feeling that we're not always told everything exactly as it really happens. And here there's one legitimate clue, even in the document itself. I mean the death certificate, which is still pending. This means it's pending, it's not final, it's preliminary. The final cause and the so-called manner of death will only be officially confirmed after toxicology and microscopy. So preliminarily it's the heart and blood vessels, but the final conclusion is still ahead. I'm telling you what's been announced, and as always, you can draw your own conclusions. Graham was planning to meet with Trump almost immediately after his arrival because, as he told Trump in a phone conversation, he has an idea on how to get the election law through Congress. That is, the one Trump says is the most important thing he has on his desk, that Congress absolutely must approve and he must sign. Graham talked about this law and sort of talked about how he would get it passed, but he probably saved some details for later and decided to discuss them with Trump. Now, well, I'll come back to this a bit later, but for now let's move on to the second topic. Purely politically, the death of the senator and Republican instantly turned into a question of power, because every seat in the current Senate is worth its weight in gold. According to the laws of South Carolina, that's the state Graham is from, the first move belongs to the Republican governor, Gary McMaster. He appoints a temporary replacement, meaning someone to serve as senator, and it's almost certain that this will be a Republican. Well, that is 90, let's say 100%. Well, they say nothing is ever 100%, so just in case. So the party's majority is restored, but that's only until January 2nd or 3rd when the new Senate, the new Congress, comes in and replaces the old one. Now, the accelerated process is starting. The period for nominating new candidates to the Senate opens on June 21st. July. Sorry, so it's really soon. Special Republican primaries will be held until August 11th, and if a second round is needed, it will be 2 weeks later. The actual election will take place in November, where a Republican will compete against a Democrat. A second round will be necessary within the Republican Party if none of the candidates gets 51%. The names of potential candidates have already been mentioned, and the people mentioned most often are members of Congress. This includes Joe Wilson, who is probably the oldest Republican in the state. His most likely successor, that is, in a member of Congress who has been publicly named, is Nancy Mace, who, according to rumors, has herself been eyeing the Senate seat. Also in the lineup is Lieutenant Governor Pamela Evett. From the Democrats, Annie Andrews is running. And by the way, sorry, not Andy, Annie Andrews. She was already planning to run in the November elections, but now it's from the Democrats. For the Republicans, of course, this is a kind of stress test, right? South Carolina is a deep red state where Trump got 56% in the elections, and any candidate from the Republican Party is expected to win almost automatically, but almost doesn't count. It's not guaranteed, especially when you have to make a new person recognizable in just a few weeks. The sitting senator always has connections built up over the years, so to speak, recognition, as it's called. Everyone knows him and so on. The replacement doesn't have that, and that's why, of course, they look for someone who is also known in the state. And this brings us to the main point, to the reason why Graham actually flew to Kyiv, I think, for the 10th time. So let's move on to the sanctions, because this person's departure is not just an empty chair. It's possibly the loss of the architect of the toughest anti-Russian bill in recent years. What is this law? It's called the Sanctions Against Russia Act of 2025. Why 2025? Because it was initiated in 2025. In the Senate, it's listed as S-1244, but among the people, it's been nicknamed the Sanctions from Hell. The essence is simple and devastating for the Russian budget. Duties ranging from 0 to 500%. On any country that buys oil, gas, or uranium from Russia. Oil, gas, or uranium? Yes, 500% is not a typo, not a mistake. The strike is aimed not so much at Russia itself, but at its main buyers, China and India. If you want to trade with America, stop fueling the war. Graham introduced this bill in January of 26, meaning he wrote it in 25 and introduced it in January of 26. And importantly, he introduced it together with Trump on board Air Force One. Behind the bill, meaning the proposed law, stood an unusually broad coalition, about 72 senators from both parties. By the way, at one point there were even 80, but then some senators started changing, things started shifting, and so on. But 72 senators definitely support it. And ladies and gentlemen, 72 is more than 60. That means they can overcome any resistance, even from the president. There's absolutely no problem. I mean, 72 is a lot. And here comes the most dramatic part in terms of timing. Literally a day or two before his death, on July 10, Graham announced that he had finally achieved the main thing. He got the administration's procedural sign-off and Trump's consent. What does that mean? He announced it as if together with Trump, yes, but the devil is in the details, as they say. The details. When he announces who then gets the right to decide from 0 to 500% and so on, it was being scrutinized. And so, in the end, they reached an agreement. The White House, which used to hold things back because it didn't really understand, well, the White House wants to lead the process, but here it's not very clear what will happen after it's adopted. The White House, which once delayed actions, gave the green light at the perfect time for a strike. The Ukrainians, with their drones, have reportedly disabled up to 40% of Russian oil refining capacity, so the leverage is at its maximum. Support from the White House has been received, and there are enough votes in the Senate. And at this moment, the bill's main driving force stops. His heart literally, stopped at the peak of his own campaign. Hence your legitimate question, is it possible without Senator Graham? Here's my answer. Yes, it's possible, and here's why. Graham was the driving force, but honestly, he wasn't the only one keeping it moving. The bill has a second lead author, and that's Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal. And what they did, well, they worked together quite a lot, but the fact that they introduced it together as a Democrat and a Republican, is what made it so powerful and popular. So, as I already said, there are more than 70 supporting co-authors. Well, let's say they just signed on after it was introduced. These people already signed up. And what settles everything is Trump's approval, which was obtained while Graham was still alive. The legal framework is ready, the text is written, the deal with the White House is made, and the votes are gathered. And what is missing now, you may ask? Two things. The first is the will of the Republican Majority Leader, John Thune. He is the one who controls the time on the floor and decides when to bring up which bill, whether to put it forward or not. Well, I mean, for a vote, for discussion, and so on. The second point is more subtle. Political insurance is lacking. Trump agreed to support the bill on the condition of flexibility, the right to decide for himself when and against whom to apply these tariffs. While Graham was alive, he played the role of the hawk who kept pressing the gas and didn't let the issue die down. Without him, it stalled. There is a great risk that the law will be passed, but in a softened, dormant form, like a tough framework on paper, used only when the president decides to use it. And here a heavy burden falls on the president. No, I can't do anything. As they say, it was handed to me and I had to sign it because, after all, there were 80 or 72 people. Because even without me, as they say, if I hadn't signed it, they would have voted again. And that's it, so to speak. My veto would have been overridden, so there's nothing I can do. I'm not a bad person, I'm a good one, but there's nothing I can do. Right? And the other option is when, let's say, the Chinese say, well, negotiations and discussions are happening, and suddenly we agree that this law won't take effect. Here, what you might call bitter irony appears. If the bill does get passed in the coming weeks, at a moment, and the moment I say is perfect, it will almost certainly be presented as a monument to Graham, as the fulfillment of his last wish. The architect's death could become that emotional push that was missing for Thune to bring the bill to the floor, as they say. Yes, that is, well, to put it up for a vote. That is, a person who didn't live to see his victory by just a couple of days can secure it by that very fact, by the act of his passing. For Ukraine, this means that the window of opportunity hasn't closed. It may have even opened a bit wider. In conversations, Graham said, "We agreed with the White House on a version of the bill that they support, which means it will become law." And at the same time, he formulated what he called his formula for ending the war. 3 broad strokes. Make Ukraine more lethal, make it, well, let's say, make it clear to everyone bankrolling Russia that they will have to pay for it. And by the way, Europe too. And at the same time, leave Putin a way out that isn't humiliating, as he said, an off-ramp, so to speak, a way to save face. Yes, so that the war can be ended. That is, not to put him in a humiliating position. Now, how the world is bidding him farewell. And this also speaks to his stature. Trump wrote briefly and in his own way, "Lindsey Bill, you will be greatly missed." So sad. And he added that Graham was a true American patriot and always worked hard. Senate Republican leader John Chun said that his heart was heavy and that Graham's influence on the federal judiciary, on our defense, and on his beloved South Carolina would be felt for generations to come. Zelensky replied from Kyiv, saying America and the world have lost a strong leader. Graham was a true defender of freedom who stood by Ukraine at its most critical moment. And he noted that the senator visited the country 10 times during the war, and that they met twice just last week. And perhaps the most personal words came from Jerusalem. Prime Minister Netanyahu wrote, "Israel has lost one of its best, greatest friends. America has lost a great patriot. I have lost a friend." And he added that this was who Graham was at his core. Lindsey understood that the security of Israel and America is inseparable. Israeli President Herzog called Lindsey a beacon of moral clarity. By the way, people always said that he was a truly moral person. Let's put it all together. Within a day, the open question was closed with an official diagnosis: aortic dissection. natural causes, although the doctors haven't made a final conclusion yet. The Senate seat is entering a rushed race where the Republicans have to win, but let's see. They have to, as they say, make it in time and do everything right. And Graham's main legacy is the sanctions from hell against Russia. It was left without its engine at the very moment it could have passed. And now everything is decided by three people: Blumenthal, who will pick up the banner, Thune, who will bring it to the floor, and Trump, who holds the switch in his hand. Whether this law will become a monument to the senator or quietly fade away on the president's desk, we will see in the coming weeks. We will keep watching. Now, about what concerns the president, the White House, and probably yours truly most of all. This is a bill called the Safe America Act. It requires voters to present a document proving citizenship when registering, and then to show an ID during voting to prove that you are who you say you are. Supporters present it, of course, as a safeguard against non-citizens voting, and the House of Representatives has already passed it. February of this year, yes, February 2026, but it got stuck in the Senate. The Democrats have enough votes for what we call a filibuster. That means you need 60 votes to break a filibuster, and we, the Republicans, don't have that. Not a single Democrat is willing to, cross over to this side. That's what Graham was talking about regarding the technical way and how to achieve something that can't be accomplished head-on. And indeed, there was a technical way. The key is that Graham was the chairman of the Senate Budget Committee, and that gives a special tool called budget reconciliation. Such a bill can pass with a simple majority of 51 votes, not 60-51, and the filibuster doesn't apply to it. Such laws, it doesn't matter why or how right now, that's just how these laws work in the Senate. So Democrats can be bypassed. All we need to know is that Democrats can be bypassed.
Проблема.
There's just one problem. There's a rule called the Byrd Rule. In reconciliation, in this thing, yes, you can only include things that are related to money. But not purely political matters, and the Senate parliamentarian, there is such a position, the Senate parliamentarian, who checks whether the submitted bills comply with the Constitution and various laws. So this parliamentarian strikes out anything that is not related to the budget. Graham came up with a way to get around this, not to ban it directly, but to make voting-related rules a condition for funding. He suggested grant programs. He said that to receive this grant, you are required to remove illegal immigrants from the voter list and verify it. So the politician clings to the expenses, and according to his calculations, it goes through the parliamentarian. His own words: "There are limits to reconciliation, but we will make the first payment for the SAVE Act through reconciliation." And about the strategy, we have to be on the offensive, make the Democrats vote against competition. What? For what? For the majority of Americans. Because, honestly, you remember 75, 80%, I think, of Americans surveyed want only people with citizenship to be able to vote. And then, when they come to vote, they should show that they are who they say they are. I'm not sure if it's 75 or 80%, but it's definitely an overwhelming majority. Graham publicly announced this plan on the radio in his, South Carolina. So, the idea was widely known in the Republican camp. That is, the idea itself doesn't die with him. It's been voiced, it's known. What fades isn't knowledge, but the lack of understanding leverage. The chairman's gavel of the Budget Committee was in Graham's hands, and it was he, specifically he, who had the right to include instructions in reconciliation. This gavel, the one in his hands, means that when you're the chairman, you can do it. Trump, by the way, wanted a rougher approach, so to speak, as they say, to break it with a crowbar to completely abolish or override the filibuster, but Majority Leader Thune said directly that there aren't enough votes for that in the party. That's why Graham's workaround through the budget was the main and, in fact, the only real option for this issue. What's happening now? Everything comes down to the budget workaround, and it's dried up, orphaned at the most sensitive point. We need a new chairman of the Budget Committee who, first of all, will want to use precious reconciliation specifically for an election issue, and secondly, will be able to push the grant structure, yes, these grants, through the parliamentarian. Graham himself, even while he was alive, was aiming not for now, but for the fall package of 2026, meaning the window, so to speak, was ahead, not right this second. The result is, to be honest, yes, the plan is alive and publicly known. There, the House side is done, chamber meaning the lower house, that is, Congress. But the driving force and, most importantly, the budget gavel are still lost for now. And now the fate of the law depends on who gets this gavel and whether they want to use it to hit the Democrat over the head. So, ladies and gentlemen, Graham's death has seriously and painfully affected our plans. But I think the Republicans will very quickly find another representative. What am I saying? Another chairman of this Congress. And I really hope that one of the conditions for his appointment will be the passage of this law. That's all for today. See you in the next broadcast.